I wish I could tell you that if you are a person who is, between 5'7" and 6 feet tall, and you have blue eyes or brown eyes, that the sativa varieties are going to be right for you, or that the sativa varieties are going to give you panic attacks. I can't do that. The only way to determine it would be to actually experience ingesting those or smoking those, which is certainly also not what I'm suggesting, right? That's up to you. I'm not telling you what to do or what not to do. But there are no good predictors. In fact, if you look in the literature, it is not at all clear that people who have a heightened level of anxiety when they do not smoke cannabis will experience cannabis as less paranoia-inducing or more relaxing. That's simply not the case. Now, what we can say for sure is that general categories of effects, such as increased focus and reduced anxiety, are largely due to activation of areas like the prefrontal cortex. Now, unlike other compounds like nicotine or alcohol or neurotransmitter systems like dopamine, when we talk about the cannabinoid system, and I say effects, biological effects, psychoactive effects, I want you to keep in mind always, please, 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 keep in mind that those effects can be varied and often opposite in direction. So let's just give an example of that. I just mentioned that when people smoke or eat sativa, that it tends to lead to one specific set of, or generally leads to one specific set of effects, heightened focus, mood, etc. Whereas when they ingest or smoke indica and its components, right? Again, we're still talking about THC and CBD in varying ratios, but now indica cannabis, and you say, well, why would it improve the transition time to sleep? Or at least give people the impression that it improved the transition time to sleep. We'll talk about what indica actually does for sleep in a little bit. But indica also tends to suppress activation of the amygdala and threat detection centers in the brain, again, binding the same CB1 receptors and those retrograde signaling mechanisms I talked about before. But it also tends to shut down the hippocampus, an area of the brain associated with memory, which is why indica varieties lead to pronounced, or I should say profound, defects in short-term memory and sometimes in long-term memory as well if it's consumed over long periods of time. We'll talk about short, medium, and long-term consumption, occasional consumption going forward. So what I'd like you to take away from this component of the discussion is, first of all, the mechanism of action by which cannabis impacts the brain and body, but in particular the brain, is going to be through CB1 receptors, and those CB1 receptors can lead to either an acceleration or a brake on particular biological mechanisms, and there are going to be a constellation of different accelerations and braking of different neural systems in the brain and body, depending on whether or not people ingest sativa or indica or some hybrid strain. And perhaps most importantly, even if you didn't understand anything that I've said about the biology of these different strains and the receptors, please do understand that there is no way to predict what the effect of a given strain will be on an individual.